Good afternoon, and welcome to part 2 in our webinar, AI Use Cases in Case Studies for Commercial Insurance. Today we are joined from IntellectSeek by Jim McKinney, Chief Strategy Officer and Products Business Head, and Lila Bean, Chief Customer Officer and Head of Consulting. We also have Jeff Goldberg, Executive Vice President of Research and Consulting at Novarga. This second installment in our series will focus on AI adoption strategies for commercial insurance providers. Just a few quick notes before we get started. Please post any questions you have during the webinar in the questions panel. We will have time at the end of the session for Q&A where we will address these questions. There are also a few poll questions throughout the session. We encourage you to participate in the polls so that we can see where carriers like yourselves stand with some of these trending issues. Now that we have all the housekeeping out of the way, let's get started. Jeff, I will have you start us off. Jeff?
Great. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for having me here today at IntellectSeek. I appreciate it and love talking about AI. And so last week we talked about use cases and kind of how to value AI investments. And this week I'm going to be talking about adoption strategies and how you mature AI at your organization. So just a little bit about Novarga. We work exclusively with insurance companies and insurance technology companies on technology and operations strategy in the insurance vertical. Normally, this is where I say any charts and graphs you see during my talk are driven by insurer surveys. I don't actually have any charts and graphs in my talk. So it's today, last time there was a little bit more of like, what's the current status? What are people investing in? This time, I'm talking a little bit more almost exclusively thought leadership topics. And I realized I forgot to set my timer, so I'm going to just set that going to make sure that I don't talk for too long, because I definitely want Lila and Jim to get their shares. All right, so let's go to the next slide. All right, so this slide was in the last presentation. So if you were with us last time, you saw this already. But I want to come back here and talk about AI from the point of view of adopting AI at your organization. The thing is that AI is, we talk a lot about AI, we talk a lot about technology, and in fact, last week, or maybe it was 2 weeks ago, forget what happened. I spoke a lot about how you shouldn't have a technology-driven project. You should have a value-driven project. You should understand the use case and the value that's bringing to the table. But the reality is, AI is important, and we are trying to mature our ability to work with these emerging technologies, and that does mean making some investments in skill building and understanding and learning. And the thing here is that AI doesn't exist in a vacuum. And these three technologies, we'll say technological areas, are all very tightly intertwined. And every insurer needs to be thinking about how they are investing in all of them, where they're investing, what the value is, but how they're building their skills over time. And so just to recap, right, we've got three really major things that have happened in the last 5 to 10 years. One of them is data sources. So much more. Insurance industry has always had a lot of data, but now we have even massively more data, and it's external data, it's data augmentation, it's social. I'm calling it IoT here because IoT is a major new source of data, this kind of real-time behavioral data. But we're also talking social media, we're talking the ability to aggregate data sources from different vendors, just internet data in general, news sources, etc. This flood of data. Second piece is big data technology, right? It used to be it didn't matter if we had that kind of data. You couldn't do anything with it, right? You couldn't just dump that into a relational database and hope to query it. But now we have technology that actually allows us to manipulate that data. But that is more data than we can possibly use. It is more than a human being can look at and make a decision around. And that's where AI technologies come in. Advanced analytics, advanced predictive modeling, artificial intelligence, machine learning. And so the thing is, we're talking about adopting AI, but you have to think about all three of these together. And that's really, you really have to think about a strategy that covers how you're approaching this space. So let's go to the next slide and talk about how these things break down a little bit. And I'm going to kind of step through this repeatedly. So what this picture, I'm really going to focus on the bottom slice today. The next like 4 or 5 slides are walking through the bottom slice, but I want to talk a little bit about big data and IoT first before I do that. The thing about big data and IoT, as with AI, is that you can't become an expert in one day, right? And so how will you become an expert? How will you evolve your understanding of these technologies? What are you going to invest in? And that's true of pretty much any emerging technology. Now, once again, I'm kind of breaking a little bit the rule I had in the previous session, which is, one thing I said, don't be technology driven, be value driven, and I'm talking about a technology driven investment. But I also want to talk about, I also talked about how you should be use case driven, but you have to do that. You have to be driven by the technology as well, just from understanding your own skill, right? You need to make sure that in the future people understand what's going on. The other thing I talked about last time, and I still really believe in, is do you even need to build these skills directly, or are you going to work with third parties? Are you going to buy purpose-built solutions from vendors like IntellectSeek that are going to actually deliver specific AI capabilities for your organization? And the answer is yes, you should be doing that. But if you don't understand what they're doing at all, that starts to put you at a disadvantage. You need to be able to evaluate these things. So even if you're not really building the AI or big data or IoT tech yourself, you should have an understanding of how they evolve, some understanding in your organization about them, some skill sets that help you work with the vendors, help you pick the right vendors, help you understand which vendors do what the best. And so that's the reality is every insurer is going to have a strategy for these technologies that involves a mix of third-party products that they purchase, consulting and sort of capability, outsourcing, as well as their own internal tech skill sets. And so much of this is really going to be, for many insurers, it's really going to be the third-party solutions they buy, but that doesn't absolve you of the need to understand how the space works and how it's going to influence the insurance industry over time. All right, so now that being said, let's talk about AI. Let's talk about how AI makes an impact in an organization. And that is with the next slide. So what I've done here is broken it out into several phases. Or in this case, it's not really phases so much as different layers of value that AI can bring to an organization, whether you're buying a solution out of the box or you're building AI skill set yourself. The key is AI is going to help you as an insurer get new insight out of that immense quantity of data that we're capturing via IoT and that we're storing within a big data environment, right? That's the two things I talked about before. That's where AI comes into play. But also, it's still pretty early in the AI revolution. I will say, really no AI technologies are mature yet. Obviously, IntellectSeek will talk about the maturity of their specific point solution, and that is true. But the reality is we're, the next 10 years are going to continue to see more and more evolution, and that means if you get the best solution on the market today, you're going to have to keep updating it, keep working with the vendors to evolve it. That is part of maturing. That's part of the ongoing maturity. Hopefully, if you work with a vendor, they will be doing that as well. So you don't necessarily have to, right? But you should keep an eye on the marketplace and understand what others are doing at all times, as with any maturing technology. Now, also, a lot of insurers, when they talk about AI, they mean chatbots, right? Or sometimes RPA, right? I just want to be clear that AI is a lot of different things. And we talked about some of those use cases last week, but it covers a lot of ground. But now let's break down these 3 layers of AI value, which is the next slide. So first, it's about better insight. I think this is probably the most clear, right? Hey, it's AI. It can make better decisions for us, right? But really, for each of these layers, what I want to talk about is how AI is doing things. It's around decision making and it's around how you use your data. And so my feeling here is you take the same amount of data and you make a better decision, right? So you think about an insurer right now, they're gathering a lot of data during their normal submission process or normal claims, first notice of loss, and suddenly we can augment those human decisions with AI decisions. We take the same process and we augment it with AI. In fact, actually, I have a little on my mug here, my Novarica mug. It says cyborgs are better than robots, which is a little joke we have internally, which means, hey, we're not trying, AI is not necessarily replacing humans, it's augmenting them. And when you have a machine-human hybrid, that's a cyborg. Of course, the flip side to that is cyborgs are also better than humans, right? A human can make a better decision when partnered with this kind of AI intelligence. So, can we make a better underwriting decision? Can we estimate reserves better? Can we predict fraud, right? Taking the data we've already got coming in, and that's the key concept. It's the same amount of data. We're already gathering this data. We already have this backlog of data, this historical loss records, et cetera. And AI is jumping in there and changing the way we think about that. So next slide, approach number 2. Now we're talking about better automation, right? This is different than insight. Obviously, automation tends to mean AI is making decisions for us, right? Rather than having to have a human review it. Now we're really talking about replacing the human in the decision-making process. But the difference between this and insight is insight, we're trying to get better decisions, right? When you're trying to improve your loss ratios, improve the risk portfolio, improve your claims output, you want to make a better decision than you did before by using artificial intelligence. Automation isn't about making a better decision, it's about making a faster decision. So the idea is, can we take the existing data coming in, the same process, make the same decision in less time? Can we keep the process moving without a human having to be in there, and keep the same level of quality, right? That's a big fear, is you swap out humans with AI and suddenly we start facing adverse selection. We're making bad decisions. We're bringing in riskier prospects because AI doesn't have the same, it's not a human. It's humans who have been doing this for a long time. And so better automation is about keeping the same process faster without requiring humans at every step. In 2020, we saw a lot of situations where that had to happen suddenly because of the insurance industry, suddenly working remote. I'm going to bring up a example that is it's not P&C, and I know the audience today is mostly P&C, but always good to understand what's going on in the life side of the business. But life insurance, traditionally does a blood test for large life policies. Has a paramed come visit your home. In 2020, home visits were out of the question, and we've been talking about this in the life side for decades. Can we sell life insurance with large policies without having to do that very invasive medical testing, and actually still sell life insurance and not have not only sell terrible policies now because we haven't validated everyone medically. And last year, suddenly everyone had to start doing that, or they could sell 0 policies because you couldn't send somebody to personally take these tests and run these. And so suddenly AI, people were saying, okay, fine, we've got all this data, all this medical history, all this medical outcome data, we've got AI. We were forced into saying, can AI automate this process for us without having a human intervene? And the goal wasn't to be smarter. It was to, frankly, the goal wasn't even to be as smart as the full process. It was just, can we be almost as smart? Can we still sell insurance and life insurance without cratering our loss ratios because we're not doing this anymore? Can AI actually help us make that decision? And that's really, really important, right? And that's true everywhere, right? It is. Better automation is, and so the last thing I'll say is automation is about responsiveness. It's also about cost, right? You're actually using AI to reduce costs, right? The first one, better insight, is really about better risk management, better decision making. Automation is about cost reduction, better process flow. And finally, we're going to get to and actually, just to go back to the cyborg thing, right? Automation versus augmentation. Insight, we're really talking about augmentation with automation, you're talking about automation. You're talking about robots only, right? AI only in many parts of the process. All right, next, finally, approach 3. It's about a better experience. So the idea around experience is it's kind of the third way of thinking about how we use data and how we make decisions. In this case, it's can we make the same decision with less data? Can AI help us? Yeah, the first two was can you make a better decision with the same data? The better automation was can we make the same decision with the same data, right? Just do it automatically. And here we're talking less data, same decision. Can we simplify what we're forcing everybody to do? A lot of insurers have started saying, can we do more direct sales? Can we build mobile apps for products? And the thing about direct sales and mobile apps and things like that is you can't, it's really difficult to get someone to go through, a 45-person survey on a phone, right? So suddenly you are saying, can we simplify our policy, our questionnaire? Can we ask 10, 15 questions? Can we ask 5 questions instead of 40 questions? And that makes the experience better. And when you're trying to go from 40 questions to 5 questions, the goal isn't necessarily to be smarter. It's just, can we be as smart? Can we use AI to augment the kind of data we're pulling in from other sources so that the experience for the end user, the agent or policyholder or policy applicant is better. And you do that in a few ways. One, data augmentation. You use AI to bring in data sources from the outside, aggregating data from the internet, from public, from semi-public, from private sources. And that way you don't have to ask as many questions, but you still have the same level of knowledge. And the other is maybe AI can just figure out ways that, search through big data and figure out, what, it turns out these 4 questions are the ones that are really, really key to making the decision. And we can cut out some of these other questions, or we can push those other questions to later, essentially doing this kind of big data analysis and with machine learning. And so suddenly you've made a much better submission process, a much better FNOL process, a much better process in general that makes everyone happier. And look, I talked about that for direct and for policyholder or mobile apps, but obviously agents also don't like answering a million questions. If you can simplify their experience as well, they are also going to be more likely to work with you. So that's the better experience, right? That's the third way. So now let's put all these together. The key here is that we're talking about insight, automation, and experience together. And that's about the quality of the decision you make, the time it takes you to make the decision, and the input that's required to make that decision. Obviously, together, we can make the goal, the best goal is with less data, you make a better decision in less time, right? That is the winning in AI world, right? It's you get a better experience, you get better automation, you get better insight. And the thing I'll say is that these aren't tiered, right? When I talk about big data and IoT, I sometimes talk about the steps, the phases that you go through in order to mature. You can be focusing on any one of these 3 these approaches in AI, depending on what is most important to your organization, right? Are you customer focused? It's all about the customer. It's all about CX. Then you're probably thinking about how you fix the experience, how you use AI to simplify your questionnaires, get things out there. If you're a process-focused organization, cost reduction mode, you're looking to see if you can use AI to automate your process. If you are all about, profitability and loss reduction, you're looking at insight improvement. You're looking at ways that you can do better predictive modeling and make better decisions and be able to bring in better risk. And all 3 of those things are important to every insurer, but different people at the insurance companies are focused on different parts, and at different times you are focused on different areas. Last year, lots of insurers went to a operational cost reduction mode, and this year we're actually seeing a lot of insurers back into a customer-focused growth mode. And so depending on the year and the external conditions can really change it. Before I go on, we're going to take a quick break and do a poll. So if we can go over to that poll and bring that up for the audience.
Sure, they should be able to see it now.
Okay, wonderful. So first of all, I realize this is a trick question. The obvious answer is all of the above. But what I want to ask for those of you on the call right now is to talk about where you see AI helping the insurance industry the most. Which do you see as the focus, the primary focus for your insurance organization, or for the insurance organizations you work with? And so that is it providing better insight? Is it providing better automation, or providing better experience? So insight is underwriting decisions, better under risk decisions, better, better claim severity prediction, things like that. Is it better automation? Is it providing answers quicker? Is it taking humans out of some of the decision-making processes? So it's not necessarily a better decision, but an equivalent decision right away, faster turnaround. Or is it providing better experience? Is it about reducing the number of questions you're forced to ask? Is it about really taking that focus on how can we allow somebody to submit a policy, submit a claim without having to put them through what is sometimes a very arduous process? And so, all right, I think I don't know if we're ready to see the results.
Do you see them now?
I don't see them. Oh, here I do. Okay, great. I see them. So we got about just over 50% saying providing better insight, 15% saying providing better automation, and 30% providing better experience. So first of all, great mix. I think that makes a lot of sense to me. I think insight tends to be where we think about it first. It's not the most. I think I said that it's the most obvious, but it's not the easiest to achieve. But I think and here's what it is really. The insurance industry has always said, how can we take data and make better pricing and risk decisions? And in fact, every emerging technology in the space almost always starts there. And there has been this, and AI in that case is really just the next evolution of data analytics. And data analytics has been evolving for decades, if not centuries, in terms of the insurance industry. So I think that makes perfect sense, but I'm glad to see others also focused on automation and experience. So that's great. And one thing I do want to say before I move on is that these categorizations are also obviously bleed into each other, right? So can we stay back at the last slide for 30 more seconds? Thank you. So these categories bleed into each other, right? I talk about experience as being reduction of questions, but the reality is one of the best ways to improve experience for agents and policyholders or policy applicants is rapid turnaround time in your response, right? Not having to wait for a decision from the insurer, not having to wait for a rate, not having to wait for a claims payment, right? I mean, when it comes to claims, the best possible experience is someone submits something and you instantly give them money, right? And so obviously, so I just want to be clear that yes, all three of these, like making a better decision quickly also improves the experience, right? So I just really think that's important to note, that I've split them up along these three areas, but all three of these areas overlap as well. And just like all three, just like different emerging technologies overlap, these things all come together. All right, now we can go to the next slide. So now, next slide is a reminder of stuff I talked about last time, just before I go into my conclusion here, is that your AI investment should be use case and value driven, right? You're not just investing in technology, you're investing in things that help you sell more, manage risk better, cost less to operate, and you should be thinking about different ways to do this. Are you working with insurtechs? Are you working with incumbent vendors, your core system vendor, your consulting partners, and your own organization, right? This is how things go. And you really should be thinking about general purpose-built AI as much as you might be thinking about building general purpose AI skill sets. That's going to be the easiest and fastest way to implement AI at your organization. So now finally, 2 slides of thoughts on how you really mature some best practices in maturing your adoption strategy for artificial intelligence. So first, you have to prepare, right? What do you need to do as an organization to prepare for AI ML initiatives? And this is true whether you're building AI on a general purpose platform or you're bringing in AI tools and technologies that are purpose-built from partners. First, what are the right processes and what's the anticipated value? I talked about that a lot. I probably talked about that the entire time last time. I think we all get it. What are the processes that are good first candidates, right? A few of them, line them up. Which are the ones you're going to do? Second, what are questions are you going to ask, right? The thing about AI is it opens up new questions that you can be asking your data. If you don't know what you're going to ask, what you're trying to learn from an AI process, it's going to be hard to prove value and it's hard to be successful, right? What are the things that you're trying to get out of this, and how are you going to reframe what you're thinking, what you're asking? Make sure you have enough data to get started, right? Choose processes that have a lot of good, high quality data, or where you have a really good data augmentation coming in from a third party source. You can't do AI against very limited data sets. And finally, what's your talent look like? Are you training people? Are you hiring people? Are you working with third party partners? Make sure you have that lined up before you start these investments. So now that's preparing. The next slide is about implementing, right? So what do we need to do to implement? They're not guaranteed to succeed. This is a real fail fast kind of innovation investments right now. So be prepared for that. You're trying to bring business process expertise and data expertise together, articulating the objectives, and making sure it's not just, this is not just, there's not one person in this process. This is not kind of a magic thing where you point to somebody and say, you take care of this. It requires a lot of people across the organization to really do this. Leverage software as a service, leverage cloud services. It's really hard to build the scalability internally. This used to be really important. I think most of the industry gets this now, especially after last year. Several pilot projects going on at once, right? You're trying to build understanding as well as success at the same time. You've identified multiple processes. You might have multiple tools. One tool for data, document ingestion that you're working with. Another tool that's more kind of like a sort of data science in a box that you're outsourcing, risk analysis of your claims history to. Have several pilot projects going on so you both can learn and see which ones work. And in a fail-fast environment, you expect some of them might not work out, so you want to have some things that are wins as well. And finally, yes, expand on your successes. Where it's working, invest more. Show wins to the organization. And when things don't work, don't worry. You've learned from it. You've built expertise, and you're going to keep investing. That's hard for some insurers to do. And having good partners will actually really help you do that. Not because they take the blame for when things go wrong, but because a lot of technology companies and service providers tend to have a really good strategy around sort of running multiple projects and celebrating successes and failures. Well, that's it for me today. Thank you so much for having me, and I'll be sticking around to answer questions after Lila and Jim speak.
Great. Thank you, Jeff. You offered us some really good insight into the approaches for implementing AI. So up next, Lila and Jim are going to revisit some of the questions from part 1 of the series and talk about how you can move ahead and begin implementation. So Lila and Jim, I will turn it over to you. Go ahead. Lila?
Thanks. Yeah, thanks,
Sure.
Barb. So just as a recap, in the last session, we had done a few polls, and we have pulled out 2 specific results to discuss today, because the focus for today is obviously adoption strategies and how do you get that ROI out of this. And most of the people, interestingly, said very similar things, which is culture. I don't know where to start. I don't know how to measure the benefits. And on the next poll, in the next one slide, Barb, you will see that they said they've started it, but they do not get the expected ROI. So we want to address this. The way this part of the webinar is going to work is that Jim and I are going to talk about a few different angles on what people need to think about and some of the learnings that we have had in the industry in such AI implementations, both at large and smaller carriers. And obviously it varies by line of business as well and segments. So let me start by going on to the next slide, Barb, where we start talking about the first one I want to attack is more about realizing the benefits. How do you ensure success of AI projects and initiatives? And how do you then realize the benefits? So there's several pillars that I consider, and in no particular order. You have to look at your business strategy and first say, all right, is AI going to be part of the strategy going forward? And what is the objective of introducing AI into a business strategy? Now, your technology strategy obviously has to align with your business strategy. So key stakeholders have to be on board with the same prioritization if you want an AI strategy to succeed, and the accountability across these stakeholders has to be very clear up front, otherwise there will not be a successful strategy. Second is define your end goals. Where do you wish to be in 6 months, 1 year? Where do you want to start? And I would obviously suggest start small in an area that is easily measurable and quantifiable, that could either give you cost benefits or it could give you some sort of a loss ratio lift or underwriting speed to quote and bind. So define what that means. Now, the other piece is when you define what that means, remember, it's an organization that for some people, this may be a new channel or a new packaged product that you're introducing, which becomes a little bit easier to strategize an AI initiative versus in existing environments where you have multiple touch points and multiple processes intertwined with each other, multiple roles of people that are also intertwined. Then you have to account for process changes from your current state to what is that end state, not even end state, like desired state going to look like. And your whole standard operating procedures need to change from how do you shift the organization from your current state to the future state and the expectations. Now that comes with role changes, responsibility changes, accountability changes. And that is very critical to have a very good change management team in place that understands AI, because it is nothing like a traditional project, nothing like old-fashioned project management. It is completely different, and you have to have an innovative, creative, and a strategic mindset to make sure that the success and the impact of such things are contained. The third thing you need to not third thing, but whatever number I'm on right now is you got to look at the use case driven, just like Jeff has been mentioning all along. When you talk about use cases, now let's go to the benefit side of thing. Right now, you want to look, is it a buy versus a build? And look at where the maturity of your organization is. Maybe you're mature enough or you're large enough to be able to build these kind of capabilities and hire the right talent, like data scientists, full stack developers, those kinds of talents that are required to leverage these new technologies and do something with the data. There's so much data out there, but what do you do with it? And so when you start looking at your CBA, right, buy versus build, make sure you take into account things like how are you going to achieve these end goals from a employee compensation perspective, your talent perspective, your current technology maturity, how are your external customers going to look at this, meaning your brokers, your agents, and the end insureds. What is that user experience and this user journey is going to be across all these touch points going forward? And then does it actually make sense? What is the cost of maintaining such things? What's the cost of getting this huge amount of data sets for training these MI models? So you have to look at very deep CBA before you even decide on a buy versus build. Some of the benefits of starting small, right? So where we see carriers succeeding is they take either 1 or 2 or 3 lines of businesses and say, okay, we're just going to tackle an initial problem of cost reduction. So they may say, let's look at submission ingestion as a starting point. And this is not just RPA. This is more like you ingest it, you validate it through machine learning and NLP techniques. So it's much more sophisticated. There is some decisioning involved in here. So I would say don't go for sophisticated decisioning up front. Go for more simple to medium decisioning. And then you have to look at enriching that data. So you're giving a much better, higher quality data at point of submission, as well as you're shortening. There's a speed of ingestion. And that in turn directly goes back to your business, one of your business goals that could be broker loyalty. And like Jeff indicated, CX, user experience, is intertwined in all these initiatives. You cannot separate one from the other. The next you could look at is, Jeff talked a lot about data. So if you look at prospect prioritization, right, or submission prioritization, you can do those little, those sophisticated decisioning on the side to help you and give you that benefit, immediate benefit, middle-term benefit, longer-term benefit. And so as we move along these different pillars of success and benefits, Jim and I will play off on different points that we see have worked and some that haven't worked. So Jim, do you want to take the next point? Talk a little bit about confidence, trust, judgments, and things like that.
Absolutely. Thanks, Lila. So starting at the basics of AI, AI is basically a prediction, right? And so why is AI gained so much traction is because the cost of computing and the speed of computing is so much cheaper than it ever was before. And so at the heart of this is a prediction. And what we see with our customers that we work with is the tech side of it is pretty easy. It's the implementation and adoption that becomes difficult at times. We see that to the extent that the prediction underwriters aren't trusting the prediction, they're slow to adopt. And so it's really important as you build, even before you implement, is to make sure that you're thinking about the end user and how you get them comfortable with the prediction. If it's a black box, then it's really hard for them to get comfortable, right? And so we actually build our product set in a way where it's very transparent to how exactly we came to the prediction, whether it be data ingestion or enrichment, so that the end user, ultimately the underwriter, has clear visibility in exactly how we arrived at that answer, so that their comfort level goes up and then the adoption level goes up. So it sounds pretty basic, but it's fundamental to truly, there's a ton of change management involved with actually implementing and seeing the benefits. We saw 100% result on the poll at our last meeting said, you know what, we've implemented, we're in pilot, but we're just not seeing the benefits. And so don't underestimate the change management end-to-end organizationally, where AI is very much a point solution. It does have ramifications through the kind of end-to-end underwriting process as an example. So make sure you think upfront, in build, and have a very rigorous implementation change management plan to ensure that you get the benefits. It's not one of those things where you just build the technology, dump it in, and go on to the next project. You really got to ensure that you build appropriately. Pursuit of perfection, right? So a prediction is, certainly there's some light judgment prediction, and there's some part of process point solution that's heavy judgment, right? And so clearly it's nice and easy where it's simple judgment that you're putting in there. If this, then that. AI handles that, and you can that could be a self-learning, right? But if there's heavy judgment, or the process had heavy human judgment in the past, AI is certainly a great solution to be applied. But if there's heavy judgment, it's complex in nature, and so that's where the machine augments the human. You actually have to think about how the individual's role changes to interact with AI. And so, and in the most basic format is, whereas maybe the individual is working with data and making a decision in the past, you move to an exception handling process. So that role fundamentally changes, right? And so if you build it appropriately with end user in mind, there's really a high confidence level for simple predictions, and you can identify the more complex predictions, and you can determine your confidence level and then have kind of a kick-out process for verification. So you have to anticipate upfront in planning and in implementation how exactly you want that interaction to happen and how that role is going to change, and start to think about your organizational structure, even in some cases of maybe it's not the same people doing that role. Maybe it's a exception handling, back office, or maybe you move it to the underwriter because there's so little checking of underwriting information. The underwriter ultimately owns the decision anyways, right? So so be mindful of pursuit of perfection, and realize that AI is not perfect, and at times there has to be that human augmentation to truly extract the real value and be successful. Lila, you want to take the next one?
Yeah, because that's a good lead in. So like you mentioned, for me, AI is more of a journey. and it's never ending because you will always have new exposures, new scenarios. Tomorrow there could be a brand new construction material type that shows up in the market that no one's ever even looked at before. So when we look at inconsistencies, right, there is no even the human touch point is never 100% accurate. And when people need to make decisions that they haven't seen before, they start collaborating with others or their managers to say, okay, how do we handle this? How do we handle that? So it's similar with a machine. If a machine has, it's more, if you're now shifted from deterministic models to more probabilistic models. So the machine will try to take its prior knowledge and apply a decision to it. But that's where exception handling comes in. And this goes back to the user experience, right? So you're augmenting the user experience. When the machine has a low confidence, it'll throw up an exception and guide the user to say why that exception was thrown up. And that's when the user then does the exception handling. That's where it's minimized interaction for that particular process or end-to-end task type. Now, some of the things that I wanted to bring to light here is when in our experiences, what we've seen is we've even seen decision inconsistencies or output expectation inconsistencies within underwriters themselves and between product engineers. For example, when you determine, okay, what should this construction ISO be from this kind of a description that the broker submits, where it could be like multiple building materials in there and 70% of this, 100% of, or 10% of this, 20% of this. Meanwhile, from a NAICS, I mean, how do you decipher the NAICS from a occupancy description of which is really poor? Then you go to location name, you do Google, you do this, that. So when a machine tries to do such decisioning, you set your confidence thresholds. And the machine learns over time, and they're actually becoming very consistent in output, in the outcomes of these decisions. So one is what we've seen is the consistency of outcome is improved. The speed to decision is lessened, and exception handling is in place for those pieces that are truly edge cases or new scenarios or where the confidence level is really low. The thing with the AI journeys is you have to set these expectations up front. And the mistake people make is, oh, it's going to be 100% accurate. Nope, nobody's 100% accurate, not even a human. So those kinds of expectations have to be set up front for something to be successful in the long run, along with the change management that we keep highlighting. There is also a couple other points here. Barb, if you open up the next point, yeah, lack of feedback loops. The feedback loops is extremely important. Like I said, it's a journey. There's always new scenarios. And maybe a company may want to handle a particular scenario slightly differently because now you've had multiple class action suits for that particular type of a scenario. So let's handle it differently. So those kinds of feedback loops have to be consistent and have to be the key with feedback. And here's where you have a gotcha here. So when you do have feedback loops, that's great. Whatever method it is, you are getting the feedback, you're getting it on a timely basis, you have some sort of mechanism in place. The gotcha is, where are you getting that feedback from? Is it a new trainee or is it an experienced a center of excellence person, intake submission person, or is it from one underwriter, or is it from a consensus of all these underwriters as a sign off saying this is the consistent outcome we're going to expect? And in most cases, you will never get that. And that's what you need to strive for, because if you're going to go and retrain your models or enhance the training and the data sets, because every piece of training takes hundreds and thousands of data sets for these machine learning models to even get that level of consistency and accuracy. So if you go through that effort, you need to make sure that your feedback is signed off, that this is the consistent approach this particular company is taking for that particular scenario. So that's something I wanted to point out from a feedback loop perspective. Jim, anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I guess one simple concept on the feedback loop. The machine's really smart, but a human can teach it the wrong answer, right? Yeah. And so that's where that Lila's point of the feedback loop is. You need to have one version of the truth, and you got to think about that in how you train the model. It's not just, hey, I got feedback from an underwriter, I should go make that change. You got to really have governance around the right answer. So,
sorry, Jim, before you go to the next point, I want to also say something in addition to what you just said is the machines already have intrinsic feedback loops. So when a user does exception handling and they make edits, we're already capturing it. We know what edits were done. So the cool thing is you go back to the users, and if multiple users have inconsistently updated a particular scenario, that's a very good gotcha to go back and say, look, let's solve this as a business problem. How should we approach it? So I just wanted to throw that back throw that in there, Jim.
I love the fact that you use the term cool, because I certainly think insurance is cool. So the last one, then we'll wrap up here, is lack of holdout sets, which is a bit tactical, but definitely an observation we wanted to share. So when you use multiple sets of data and thousands of data sets, right? The first is use one set of data to build the prediction, right? And then use a second set of data to actually predict. And then you have a holdout set that needs to be separate and distinct for you to test and get comfortable at the end. And there's times when we work with customers and, you know, we've had to go back and rework some things since we didn't plan ahead on some holdout set to make sure that you have an independent test cases. So a bit tactical, but something that we bumped into a few times that we just want to make folks aware of. So with that, actually, if we could jump to the next slide, and in summary, before we open up for questions, AI implementation summary is: be clear with your expectations up front, and that's throughout the organization. Plan ahead. It's gonna have wider impact and change necessary, and so make sure it's at the right leadership level and there's a good plan. Focus on change management. Technology is the easy part at times, so you know, don't underestimate the impact to individuals and the change that will be necessary for you to become successful. And then ultimately build the product to ensure the end user will have confidence, right? So that it's actually implemented and you achieve the gains that you set forth to achieve. So that's the summary. Thanks for your time. We'd love to move to questions.
Yes, thank you. Yes, it's that was great, Jim and Lila, and it's really important to understand where the concerns lie in getting started with AI and how we can address those. So yes, let's get started with questions.
Before we go to questions, can I just jump in and say, I think these 4 bullet points right here apply to every technology innovation project that you've got going on, not just AI. So I really like this. I think you're absolutely right. But yeah, it's, you know, if you're investing in drones or you know, these 4 bullet points actually really are a good framework for just thinking about technology innovation investment, especially around emerging and innovative technology. So well, very well put. Sorry, and please continue with the Q&A.
No, it's okay. No, it's great. It's great to have this dynamic conversation. So let's start with our first question. So for an insurer who's struggling with the early steps of data governance and data validation, is it still possible to invest in AI? I think I've heard conversations about this a lot lately. So what do you guys think?
Jim, you want to go ahead and start, and then
Sure.
I'll turn it to Jeff, and then.
Sure. Sounds good.
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, if you're whoever insurer you are, you're not alone, right? We've got a lot of legacy technology in our environments. There's certainly a lot of investment going on to modernize, but I don't care which carrier you are, you have challenges, right? Data and technology and modernization, 100% of us. So, you know, so know that you're not alone. I'd say it depends on where you're investing. Some folks are investing modernization and policy admin. Some are in kind of underwriting platforms. Some are in data, or all 3. So I think it has to align with your prioritization, because AI is a point solution in my mind. When I think about the build versus buy, and I think, okay, is this strategic differentiator for me? If it is, then maybe I want to build. If it's not, and it's an automation play, maybe I want to buy because it's not a, you know, it's not a strategic differentiator. It's more about automation and ease of use. And so that's how I think about that question. It really depends on individual priorities, but I don't think there's a right or wrong answer.
Yeah, so here's how I interpret that question. And it's interesting because I've heard this question around predictive analytics as well, which is kind of a precursor to what we talk about when we talk about AI, which is, hey, my data's really messy. It hasn't been vetted in a long time. There's a bunch of legacy data in there, and I'm struggling with that. So how can I invest in, how can I do predictive analytics, and how can I do AI when all my data is still in a semi-coherent state? And I can very confidently say you can. And the reason I can say this confidently is I've worked with plenty of insurers who don't have data governance and yet still have managed to get some real value out of these kind of innovation projects. And that's because there's not one way to invest in AI, right? If you're working with a point solution from a third-party vendor where they're bringing their own data and their own modeling to the table and not necessarily even using your data, great. Doesn't matter what state your data is in. You can start taking advantage of it now. You're benefiting from AI even if it is not you doing the AI work. But then the next piece is, but that's not really the question. The question is, how do I run AI against my data when my data is for lack of a better word, bad, right? My data is not, and I don't know, it's part of what AI can help with, right? It can help you understand what percent of your data is clean, what percent it has holes. You can build confidence scores into the results that AI modeling gives you, and part of the confidence scores are driven by the quality of the data underneath. So I think it's a two-part answer from me. One part is work with third parties, work with third-party data, work with data, participate in collaborative data sets, or just work with vendors who built solutions that they've modeled using universal data rather than your particular data. And the second part is also you can still start thinking about how AI and ML can work on your data even before the data is perfect. Because as Jim said, it'll never be perfect. So you have to start at some point you're starting, and if not perfect, it might as well be now.
And also just to end that, Barb, I might just throw in that the third option is also, yes, work with vendors who already have that, or, I can give you some accelerators in that area. And some of the carriers are leveraging us also, they're looking at, we offer data scientists, so they're looking at leveraging our data science, augmenting their data science teams, because it's very costly to staff up at insurers, especially in data sciences. And in addition, you can use the data platform that's already there and augment your existing internal data with it. So you have a little bit of a stronger predictive modeling exercise going on. So there's multiple ways you can do this. Now, data governance is only a small piece of the overarching governance of a business. So I would caution that even just the small thing like data governance, there's so many regulatory changes going on right now with privacy. So I know, Jeff, you're smiling, but it's just kind of like, so that's a piece that I would suggest strengthening, because if not, it's not a good situation to be in.
Okay, thanks. So our next question actually ties in with the whole implementation part of this. And so if you're going to do AI, how do you go ahead and hire and train the AI talent? How do you even get started on that? So maybe we can add that to our checklist of getting started.
Yes, yes, right. And you may not be, Lila, you said, it's very difficult and expensive to hire data scientists. It may be impossible to hire AI scientists. There are not a ton of people right now who, there's only a few AI PhDs coming out of Stanford, and they're not going to insurance companies for the most part. They're going to tech companies and starting their own companies. You're competing with Google and Facebook and Amazon to hire those people, and that is and they're paying. It's not just that those companies are exciting; they are paying more money. So unless you are really pouring money into that hiring process, it's hard to do. And it is also hard to train for this, right? It's, I've worked with many insurers, during the process where we were upskilling COBOL developers to Java because we were migrating off of the mainframe into a Java environment. Insurance companies make real effort to train and keep their people on board. And that was a hard process, but it was surmountable. Taking someone who's a real good developer and has been building your web systems and database, that is the leap from that to AI is more than just learning a new language, right? It is a new way of thinking. It is mathematics. It is, it requires significant training investment. And so I'm not trying to be a downer about it, but I also want to be realistic that it is likely, you're not just going to go out and put up a job posting and hire 6 really good AI scientists to build out your AI capabilities at the prices you're normally paying for incoming technology resources. And so you either need to think about changing how you pay, changing how you hire, or working with third parties who might be actually either companies that you're working with or services organizations that really have their own AI staff who can supplement your team.
Yeah, Jeff, really well said. You can go to any job posting board for an insurance company. The #1 opening is data scientist, period. And, I don't understand why somebody would want to go work in Silicon Valley versus insurance, because it's cool.
Yeah, I know you're semi-joking, I think, but I think we have the most amazing data problems in the world, right? Like, it really, if you are a data scientist, this is it, right? Like, this is such depth of data, and the problems are so interesting. And so I really think that's true, but I know it's sometimes hard to convince people outside the industry that that's true.
Yeah, one of Lila mentioned it, but we have at Intellect, we have offshore resources, data scientist resources, and we get a lot of interest in that because we actually bring our data scientists, our data capabilities and technology capabilities to a carrier and help them build their own proprietary solutions. So it's a pretty cool combination.
Yeah. And the insurance industry looks at things from this long-term risk perspective that very, very few industries look at. So as a data scientist, you have this opportunity to think about things in like the big picture view, right? About how is this going to make an impact over time, right? It's just, I feel like the questions we ask are also more interesting. And, if you're at an insurer that is willing to ask those questions and willing to make that kind of investment. So I don't know, maybe I should just go around not recruiting people, I'm just going to be an evangelist for people, data scientists and AI scientists, to come work in insurance. That's going to be my next role.
So Jeff, there's something you said that I was laughing at. Who wants to come to insurance, right? But insurance is very interesting, like you pointed out, because you got life insurance, you got investment management, you got property care. It's like literally everything, right? And people don't realize the data actually overlaps even with retail, right? Yeah. And so it's a massive opportunity. And here's the thing: when you talked about COBOL to Java, that was hilarious, because I was just thinking. I asked this question to 2 different groups of carriers recently. Okay, I said, so you're going this AI journey, right? How many of you are willing to fly in a commercial plane with 0 pilots?
Yeah.
No one said yes. No one. So it's just that leap of faith is just not there yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. So we're about out of time. So I wanted to thank everyone for joining us who's been on the series since we started this. This was really exciting for all of us. If you have any additional questions or you want to learn more about AI and underwriting, please feel free to contact Jim, Lila, or Jeff directly, and you can have their contact information right here up on the screen. In case you missed out on anything, there were some really good step-by-step points. The webinar will be available on demand on our website at intellectseek.com, where you can download it and listen to it again, kind of take some notes on the checklist of implementing AI. So Jim, Lila, Jeff, thank you all. If there's anything else you'd like to add, or we can head out. So
great. Thanks so much for having me join these 2 talks. They've been really wonderful.
Yes, thanks for joining us. Thank you. Okay, everyone, thanks for your time, and we'll be in touch. Thank you.